On January 2, 2023, two helicopters operated by SeaWorld were flying over the Gold Coast of Queensland, Australia, providing tourists with scenic aerial views. But what should have been a peaceful flight turned into a nightmare. The first helicopter, piloted by Michael, was nearing the landing phase when a passenger noticed something was wrong. They urgently tapped Michael on the shoulder to warn him, but it was too late. The helicopters collided mid-air, and the main rotor blades of one helicopter tore through the windshield of the other, narrowly missing the pilot and passenger in the front seats. Debris flew as the pilot lost control momentarily, but Michael's quick thinking and composure under pressure allowed him to regain control. He made an emergency landing on a sandbar, saving the lives of several passengers. However, the other helicopter, piloted by Ashley, crashed into pieces, killing the pilot and three passengers, including a married couple celebrating their anniversary. The incident shocked the aviation world, and the investigation that followed uncovered serious safety issues. Michael, the pilot of the helicopter that landed safely, had been with SeaWorld helicopters since 2022. With over 3,100 flight hours, all in helicopters, Michael had the necessary experience to handle the situation. He had only recently completed training to operate the Eurocopter EC-130B4, a helicopter model known for its comfort and reliability. However, despite his skill, the crash revealed that even well-trained pilots are not immune to unforeseen disasters, especially when critical safety equipment is lacking. Ashley, the pilot of the other helicopter, had over 6,200 flight hours and was highly regarded in the industry. However, it was later revealed that Ashley had used cocaine just 2 days before the crash, though the levels found in his system were too low to determine if they impaired his abilities during the flight. Nonetheless, the fact that Ashley was a supervisor for the company's drug and alcohol management plan cast a shadow over his role in the tragedy. While the cocaine use did not directly cause the crash, it pointed to deeper issues of oversight and responsibility within the company. The helicopters involved in the crash were Eurocopter EC-130B4 models, which had been added to the fleet just 2 months before the incident. The EC-130B4 is a light utility helicopter chosen for its modern features, but it lacked crucial safety equipment, like a cockpit voice recorder, CVR, and flight data recorder, FDR. The company had installed cameras for filming the tours, but did not use them for flight data tracking, a decision that ultimately left investigators with fewer tools to piece together the exact events of the crash. This crash is similar to other mid-air collisions involving sightseeing helicopters, such as the 2008 incident in New York City, where human error, miscommunication, and a lack of safety equipment contributed to fatalities. The SeaWorld crash highlighted systemic issues in the tour helicopter industry, where inadequate safety technology and insufficient oversight can lead to tragic consequences. Despite the shocking loss of life, Michael's ability to remain calm and successfully land the helicopter undoubtedly saved additional lives. His quick decision-making under pressure is a testament to the skill and training of helicopter pilots. Unfortunately, Michael passed away from cancer in 2024, but his actions that day remain a powerful reminder of the human element in aviation safety. This tragic event serves as a wake-up call for the aviation industry, particularly in the realm of tourist and sightseeing flights where safety measures often lag behind technological advancements. The investigation revealed that while Michael's actions were heroic, the crash could have been prevented with better safety practices and equipment. As we reflect on this incident, we must acknowledge that the responsibility for safety lies not only with the pilots, but also with the companies that operate these flights and the regulatory bodies that oversee them. This rewrite ties together the technical aspects of the flight, the qualifications of the pilots, and the broader industry implications, offering a comprehensive view of the crash while keeping the story engaging. Let me know if you'd like to adjust or expand on any specific parts. On the day of the crash, another significant issue was the camera systems installed in both helicopters. While these systems were intended to record the scenic flights for commercial purposes, they had not been certified for installation. The investigation revealed that the helicopters should not have been operated with these unapproved camera systems. Strangely, the systems failed to record during the crash, leaving investigators to rely on passenger videos, ground cameras, and eyewitness accounts to piece together the events leading to the disaster. While the camera systems did not directly contribute to the collision, their failure highlights a broader problem: a series of discrepancies discovered during the investigation. One of the issues found was the fire extinguisher maintenance records, which did not match the data on the installed models. This might seem like a minor oversight, but the real concern lay in the fact that the fire extinguishers used on the helicopters were dry powder types, which are not recommended for aircraft. To make matters worse, one of the helicopters didn't even have a fire extinguisher on board. Although these maintenance issues were not the direct cause of the crash, they underscored deeper systemic problems. The lack of proper fire extinguisher equipment and inconsistent maintenance records compromised the airworthiness of the helicopters. This failure to adhere to standard regulations and safety guidelines creates what's known as the normalization of deviance, where safety shortcuts become commonplace until a tragedy occurs. When regulations are selectively followed, it sets a dangerous precedent that can eventually lead to catastrophic outcomes. Now, let's take a closer look at the tools available to the pilots that might have helped avoid this tragedy. SeaWorld. Helicopter tours primarily operates in uncontrolled airspace, meaning pilots are responsible for visually identifying and avoiding other aircraft. This concept, known as see and avoid, relies on the pilot's ability to detect potential collisions by looking outside the cockpit. However, finding another helicopter in midair is not as straightforward as it seems. Both helicopters were equipped with external lights, including a red anti-collision light, flashing once per second. While these lights are helpful in low visibility conditions, they are much less effective during the day, when it is often easier to spot a helicopter visually before noticing the lights. One solution to improve visibility is to paint the top of the main rotor blades in alternating high-visibility colors. Michael's helicopter, with registration VHXH9, had this high-visibility paint scheme on the rotor blades, which made it easier to see from above. Unfortunately, Ashley's helicopter with registration VHXKQ lacked this paint, making it harder to spot when looking down from above. In one particularly telling image, taken by a passenger on Michael's helicopter, Ashley's helicopter can be seen clearly against the light-colored helipad just after takeoff, but it blends into the dark green vegetation once airborne. This visual information proves that both pilots were able to see each other's helicopters before the collision, yet neither could act in time to prevent it. The lack of painted blades on Ashley's helicopter further contributed to the difficulty in spotting the aircraft from a higher vantage point. The passenger on Michael's helicopter saw Ashley's helicopter 7 seconds before impact and attempted to warn Michael by tapping him on the shoulder. However, it was too late. There wasn't enough time for Michael to take evasive action. This tragic moment shows that while the passengers saw the impending disaster, their ability to communicate with the pilots was limited, leaving both helicopters on a collision course. These findings, ranging from unapproved camera systems and improper fire extinguisher maintenance to visibility issues, point to a series of failures that could have been avoided with better oversight and adherence to safety protocols. The crash itself, though, was a consequence of a mix of human factors, technical limitations, and systemic flaws in the operational practices of SeaWorld helicopters. As we dive deeper into the organizational issues and the specific mistakes made, it becomes clear that this tragedy could have been prevented with stricter safety adherence and better communication systems in place. This rewrite integrates technical details, the failure of safety equipment, and human factors into the narrative, while maintaining the gripping storytelling tone. Let me know if you'd like to further expand on any specific aspect. By the time the pilots realized the danger, it was already too late. Despite having various tools available to help prevent mid-air collisions, a series of failures in both the aircraft systems and operational protocols led to disaster. One of the key systems intended to help pilots avoid such collisions is TCAS, the Traffic Alert and Collision Avoidance System. Both helicopters were equipped with TCAS, but the systems were not equal, and crucial limitations in how they operated contributed to the tragedy. On Michael's helicopter, the TCAS was installed on the right side of his knee, which meant it wasn't within his normal visual cross-check. This poor placement made it easy to overlook visual alerts. Additionally, the system was not linked to any of the other cockpit displays, which further reduced its visibility. The TCS system had a filter that stopped displaying alerts for aircraft below 380 feet, considering them to be too low to pose a threat. This setting meant that when Michael was coming in for landing around 1,000 feet above ground, he would not receive any alerts for Ashley's helicopter or any other aircraft operating in that area. Although the system could be modified to reduce the filter down to as low as 5 feet, this modification wasn't installed, leaving a critical gap in the pilot's ability to avoid other aircraft. Ashley's helicopter had a TCAS system with a different configuration. The system would mute all traffic advisories below 400 feet, so while a visual alert would be displayed, there would be no audio warning. However, this system relied on transponders on other aircraft to function properly. The problem was that Michael's helicopter's transponder had stopped working about 2 weeks before the crash, and it had not been repaired. Since the helicopters were flying in uncontrolled airspace, they were not required to have a functioning transponder, and as a result, Ashley's TCS system never received any alerts about Michael's position. This situation illustrates what is often referred to as the Swiss cheese model of accident causation. This model suggests that accidents happen when multiple layers of safety systems, each with its own flaws, fail to align. In this case, while TCAS could have provided a safety net, its limitations and the lack of a working transponder created holes in the system that allowed the collision to occur. Although the TCAS system wasn't solely responsible for the crash, its failure to alert the pilots to each other's presence was a key contributor. Another important tool that pilots use to avoid collisions is radio communication. In ideal conditions, pilots can use radio calls to let each other know their positions and intentions, which is particularly useful when flying under the see and avoid principle in uncontrolled airspace. However, this system also had significant flaws in this case. Michael and Ashley were operating from 2 different locations, making it essential for them to communicate with each other to maintain situational awareness. Initially, the company had required pilots to use a separate air-to-air frequency to coordinate movements, but this requirement had been phased out over time. As a result, pilots were now using a common traffic frequency, which was often congested due to its wide coverage and usage by numerous aircraft. Investigators found that the radio communication system was a significant issue in this crash. When they examined the radio calls made by the pilots flying Michael's helicopter, they discovered that 90% of the calls were clear and readable, while only 10% were unreadable, all of which occurred during the first few flights of the day. In stark contrast, nearly 94% of the radio calls made by the pilots flying Ashley's helicopter were absent or unreadable. This meant that most of the time, Ashley's calls went unheard, reducing the likelihood that Michael or anyone else in the area would be aware of his movements. This discrepancy in communication was an alarming finding. While the pilots flying Ashley's helicopter never reported any issues with the radio, the failure to communicate on the common traffic frequency was a critical factor in the crash. Since the flights were uncontrolled and the pilots weren't communicating with air traffic control, there was no one to acknowledge or troubleshoot these problems. Investigators later discovered that the root cause of the radio failure was a crack at the base of the antenna where one of the wires connected to the circuit board. This simple, yet significant mechanical failure contributed to the breakdown in communication, further compounding the risk of collision. This series of system failures, from the malfunctioning TCAS and transponder to the faulty radio, illustrates the critical need for redundancy in safety systems, particularly when operating in uncontrolled airspace. These were layers in the Swiss cheese model that, when aligned, allowed the disaster to unfold. The lack of effective communication, combined with ineffective collision avoidance systems, contributed to a situation where both pilots were unaware of each other's presence until it was too late. As we continue to explore the organizational factors behind this crash, it becomes clear that these systemic failures were not isolated incidents, but part of a larger pattern of oversight that led to a tragic loss of life. The absence of proper maintenance, the failure to adhere to safety protocols, and the lack of communication all played a role in this avoidable disaster. This rewrite connects the technical failures to the narrative of the crash, providing insights into how those failures contributed to the collision. Let me know if you'd like to adjust or explore any further details. The investigation into the SeaWorld helicopter crash uncovered several mechanical issues with the radio systems that contributed to the communication failure between the pilots. First, there was an exposed stray wire near the connection plug, which caused intermittent transmission problems. This issue, combined with corrosion damage to the antenna mounting plate and connector, further compromised the reliability of the radio system. Despite these technical concerns, the more pressing issue was how the helicopter operations were being conducted. Michael's helicopter was operating from the main helipad facility, which was located near an old parking lot. The facility featured a large passenger terminal and 4 helipads, which allowed for efficient helicopter operations. However, the facility was located just 600 feet south of another helipad, the park pad facility where Ashley's helicopter was based. The park pad had been shut down in 2019 but was later reopened in 2022 after some renovations. The decision to reopen this facility, likely due to a concession agreement between the theme park and the helicopter company, introduced a significant risk. Pilots departing from the park pad would have to cross the flight path of helicopters arriving at the main facility. This situation created a constant point of conflict between helicopters operating from the 2 different locations. Adding to the complexity, there was another helicopter tour company operating out of a nearby marina, further crowding the airspace. All 3 facilities required helicopters to fly east over an area known as SeaWorld Grass, creating a shared flight path that increased the chances of conflict. Pilots were left with visual lookout and radio calls as their primary means of collision avoidance. However, this method of see and avoid was fraught with risk, as pilots might not always have clear visibility of each other, especially when operating from different locations with limited coordination. The risks of operating from multiple locations were demonstrated by a shocking discovery during the investigation. In 2022, over 900 flight data records from SeaWorld's 5-minute tours were analyzed, revealing 6 instances where helicopters came within 200 feet of each other. What was even more alarming was that 5 of these near misses occurred after the company introduced the new EC-130 B-4 helicopters. This marked a clear indication that the changes in the fleet, combined with the lack of proper communication systems, had not improved safety. The fact that these near misses weren't properly addressed highlights a deeper organizational issue. When the first near miss occurred, the pilot should have reported it to their supervisor, and the company should have investigated the root cause to implement corrective measures. However, the company failed to recognize the seriousness of the situation and did not take steps to prevent future incidents. Instead, they continued to rely on the see and avoid method, combined with radio calls on a common frequency. This approach became a classic example of the normalization of deviance. The idea that because nothing bad had happened so far, no change was necessary. This attitude is a dangerous one in aviation, as it ignores the natural accumulation of risk over time. The investigation also revealed that safety reporting culture had significantly declined after a change in ownership, and did not recover after the pandemic. The company leadership maintained that operations should not have hazard or incident reports, which is a fundamentally flawed mindset. To prevent accidents, a positive safety reporting culture is essential. If a company does not actively collect and address hazard reports, it cannot reasonably manage the risks inherent in everyday operations. In addition to these systemic failures, other issues emerged in the investigation, including how the company presented pre-flight safety videos to passengers. While the video included important safety guidance on wearing seatbelts, some of the examples shown did not match the correct procedures. This discrepancy further illustrated the lack of attention to detail and commitment to safety within the organization. Ultimately, the investigation revealed a pattern of complacency and failure to address emerging risks. The normalization of deviance, poor safety culture, and disregard for critical safety measures created an environment where accidents were allowed to happen. The SeaWorld helicopter crash was not just the result of a single failure, but a combination of operational, technical, and cultural issues that culminated in tragedy. This part of the narrative brings to light the organizational and operational failures that contributed to the crash. It underscores the importance of safety culture, proper risk management, and adherence to safety protocols. Let me know if you'd like to adjust or add any further details. The investigation into the crash also revealed serious issues with how the ground crew managed passenger safety, specifically regarding seatbelt fittings. Ground crew were responsible for ensuring that passengers' seatbelts were properly secured, but they were not trained on how to do so. To expedite the loading process, parts of the seatbelt restraints were pre-clipped together, so passengers only needed to fasten the shoulder harness and waist component once they were on board. This led to a significant problem. At least 4 passengers on the accident flights, and possibly more, did not have their seatbelts fitted correctly. However, in this case, the seatbelt issue didn't significantly impact the outcome in terms of survivability, as the crash was ultimately caused by the collision, not a lack of seatbelt restraint. Michael's helicopter XH-9 took off for the 5-minute tour without any issues, just as he had done countless times before. About a minute and a half after his departure, ground crew began loading passengers onto Ashley's helicopter at the park pad. Michael flew his route over the SeaWorld grass area and headed north along the shoreline before making an inbound radio call when he reached Porous Point. He turned left and circled back over Wavebreak Island. By the time the passengers finished loading into Ashley's helicopter, Michael was about a mile away from Ashley. The ground crew then began their final checks to ensure the area behind Ashley's helicopter was clear of boats or other aircraft, and by the time they completed the checks, Michael was around 900 meters away. At this point, the ground crew's ability to see Michael's helicopter was compromised. Based on the distant sun angle and cloud cover, it would have been very difficult for them to spot Michael during their final clearing checks. As a result, they gave Ashley the thumbs up to proceed, signaling that he was ready for departure. However, Ashley's helicopter remained on the park pad for an additional 23 seconds, and it's unclear what occurred during that time. Perhaps Ashley was engaging with passengers or finishing up last-minute checks, but either way, these 23 seconds would later prove to be crucial. While Michael continued inbound, he saw the passengers loading into Ashley's helicopter and assumed that Ashley would take off after him, passing behind his helicopter. Based on this observation, Michael didn't feel the need to make another radio call. After all, he was listening for Ashley's taxi call on the radio, which would serve as a cue for Michael to ensure they had sufficient separation. But unfortunately, Michael never heard Ashley's taxi call. He assumed that Ashley was still on the ground, likely waiting for Michael to pass before departing. At this point, Michael was focused on his landing, and he did not consider the possibility of another helicopter being in his flight path. To make matters worse, there were 2 surface vessels in the water that Michael had to avoid during his final approach. This required him to adjust his flight path slightly to the left to pass behind one of the vessels, inadvertently bringing him closer to Ashley's helicopter. Michael, sitting in the front left seat of his helicopter, would have had a clear view out of his left side. However, when Ashley took off, he was essentially hidden behind the left door pillar of Michael's helicopter for most of the flight. In fact, about 13 seconds before the collision, Ashley's helicopter was still hidden behind the pillar, making it difficult for Michael to see it. As Michael adjusted his flight path to avoid the boat, Ashley's helicopter was still partially obscured by the cockpit structure. 6 seconds before impact, Ashley's helicopter was still barely visible in Michael's peripheral vision, and because he wasn't expecting to see another helicopter in that position, Michael remained focused on the boats in front of him. The passenger video taken during the final seconds of the flight reveals that Ashley's helicopter only came into view during those last moments, but by then, it was too late. Michael did not see Ashley's helicopter until the collision occurred. This is where the lack of a more detailed safety briefing for passengers may have contributed to the accident. If passengers had been informed on how to alert the pilot about potential threats, such as other helicopters, they might have been able to warn Michael in time. Instead, passengers likely assumed that the pilot was aware of the situation and did not think to raise the alarm until it was too late. Now the question arises, how did Ashley not see Michael's helicopter as he was taking off earlier? Michael had made an inbound radio call while over Porous Point, but Ashley, who had his radio on and was wearing his headset, was likely engaged in conversation with his passengers. It's possible that Ashley never heard Michael's radio call and instead relied on the thumbs up from the ground crew to signal that he was clear to depart. As a result, Ashley likely assumed there were no other helicopters in the vicinity. This sequence of events highlights a series of miscommunications and misunderstandings that ultimately led to the tragic crash. Both pilots were performing their duties according to standard procedures, but a combination of human error, miscommunication, and overlooked safety measures resulted in disaster. It's a stark reminder of the importance of thorough safety protocols, clear communication, and a well-trained ground crew in preventing such avoidable accidents. This part of the narrative brings together the failure to communicate effectively, the limitations of the pilot's awareness, and the breakdowns in standard operational procedures. It shows how small lapses in attention procedures and safety can accumulate into a catastrophic outcome. Let me know if you'd like any further revisions or additional details. During the investigation, the company's CEO stated that pilots were trained to always expect the possibility of a conflict and to conduct a visual check to the right when departing from the park pad. However, this raises an important question. If pilots are expected to assume that another helicopter could be in their way, what actions were taken to mitigate that risk? It's one thing to be aware of a potential danger, but proactive steps must be taken to prevent it from becoming a reality. The CEO also mentioned that pilots were instructed to pause for 1 to 2 seconds at the top of their vertical climb to scan the airspace before transitioning into forward flight. However, a review of tour videos showed that it was normal practice for pilots to transition without pausing for a scan. This suggests that there was a disconnect between what was taught and what was actually practiced, a gap that proved to be critical on the day of the crash. Just before Ashley took off, he was required to make a taxi call on the radio. Unfortunately, there is no evidence to confirm that Ashley made the call. Michael, flying the other helicopter, did not hear it, nor did 2 other pilots who would have been listening for the call. It's possible that Ashley made the call, but issues with the radio prevented the transmission from going through. However, this remains uncertain, leaving a crucial communication gap that contributed to the collision. As Ashley took off, he failed to pause and scan for other aircraft. Instead, he immediately transitioned into forward flight. At 13 seconds before impact, Michael's helicopter was hidden from Ashley's view by the roof structure of his own helicopter. Additionally, Ashley was wearing a ball cap, which further obstructed his field of vision, particularly in the area where Michael's helicopter was located. Had Ashley been sitting in the right seat, as would have been the case if he were flying an AS-350, he might have had better visibility to the right, potentially allowing him to see Michael's helicopter. At 6 seconds before impact, Ashley still couldn't see Michael as his field of vision was blocked by both his cap and the structure of the cockpit. By this point, Ashley was likely focused on avoiding 2 water vessels in front of him, and his attention was diverted from checking for potential conflicts in the air. Tragically, the 2 helicopters collided when they were just 130 feet above the water. Ashley's main rotor blade sliced through the front of Michael's helicopter, sending shards of glass and shrapnel flying miraculously. Michael's sunglasses protected his eyes from the flying debris. Despite his injuries, Michael managed to regain control of the damaged helicopter long enough to land it on a sandbar below. On the other hand, Ashley's helicopter was severely damaged. The main rotor engine and tail all separated upon impact, causing the helicopter to fall uncontrollably to the ground. The crash resulted in the deaths of Ashley and 3 passengers, a tragic outcome that could have been much worse. The investigation ultimately identified 28 safety factors and 11 safety issues that directly contributed to the crash. In response, the company took steps to address many of these issues, including creating a new position, PA boss responsible for traffic advisory roles on the ground. They also updated communication protocols for pilots, revamped briefing videos, and improved ground crew training. However, 4 critical safety issues were not addressed. These included the need to formally consider the design of conflict points in the operation and to develop safety management objectives to focus on aviation safety risk. This lengthy debrief serves as an important reminder of the vital lessons we can learn from aviation accidents. Despite the fact that 9 people survived, 4 lives were lost in this tragic event. It could have been far worse, but we must not forget the families and friends of the victims who are still grieving the loss of their loved ones. I want to express my deepest condolences to the victims' families and friends. This debrief is a valuable learning experience, and I hope it serves as a reminder to everyone in aviation that safety should always be the top priority. Thank you for watching and supporting the channel, and thanks once again to Rocket Money for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to check them out using the link in the video description below. I'll see you on the next debrief.